And since most of our audience has now joined, let's go ahead and get started. To those of you who just joined us, good afternoon and welcome to today's panel webinar, Fostering a Neuro-Inclusive Workplace. My name is Karina and I am your host for today's event. It's great to have you all here. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing today's panel moderator, Chelsea Hartner, and today's panelists, Patrick Bardsley, Teresa Thomas, and Joy Carol Young. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Chelsea. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, OAR. I am honored to be a part of this important conversation today, and good morning to everyone who is tuning in. My name is Chelsea Hartner, pronouns she, her. For those who are attending with low vision and require some visual descriptors, I am a Caucasian woman with green eyes, almost shoulder length brown hair and blonde highlights. I am currently wearing a burgundy blouse with a black blazer. I am the founder of Collectively Neurodiverse, where we help organizations create inclusive, high-performing teams by embracing difference through neurodiversity. I hold a certification in 360 Inclusive Leadership Compass and have nearly a decade of experience supporting both Metro Detroit and the North American regions in various people functions and leadership roles, from talent recruitment, acquisition, to team development, and DE&I with strategic HR resource teams. My passion for this work really comes from my personal journey. I was late diagnosed with ADHD in 2020, and after that, I became deeply committed to advocating for greater understanding and support for neurodiverse individuals in the workplace. But that's enough about me. Let's hear from our panelists. Joy, I will pass the mic to you.
Grateful to be here with you all. My name is Joy Young. I am a consultant coach with Trove Inc., an executive coaching firm. My journey has been a long and winding one, 30 plus years as an educator, teacher, and administrator, a number of years at Ernst & Young in the Neurodiversity Centers for Excellence as a coach and educator. And I am currently consulting with a number of organizations on this very important topic to me, neuroinclusion. I am the mother of an autistic son, an ADHD daughter, and grateful to be the wife for 43 years of a neurodivergent husband as well. I'm a Caucasian woman. I have shoulder-length blonde hair, rimless glasses, a black turtleneck today, and again, I'm thrilled to be with you all.
Patrick, would you like to introduce yourself at this time?
Apologies, sorry.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just catching up. I'm Patrick Bardsley, co-founder and CEO of Spectrum Designs. We're a social enterprise, merchandise and brand company based in New York that focuses on employing those on the autism spectrum or those who are neurodivergent. About 65% of our 75-person team are on the spectrum or some form of developmental or neurodiverse ability or disability, and we've been around for 15 years, and so we've really found that we've learned a lot. We've made a lot of mistakes, but we love sharing best practices, what we've picked up along the way, and I'm really excited to be here. I am a male. I go by he, him. I have brown hair. I'm wearing a light blue shirt. And as I said, very, very happy to be here and part of this conversation this morning.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Teresa Thomas. I am today, my dark hair is down. I'm wearing mostly black, and you might see a red light shining in my hair. That is my headset. I am not a cyborg that I know of. I work for the MITRE Corporation, which is a not-for-profit that runs federally funded research and development centers, which basically means we're contractors in the DC area. At MITRE, I manage a handful of folks in our cyber critical infrastructure lab, but more importantly, I have an adult son on the autism spectrum. I am also married to a wonderful husband with ADHD, and I am navigating my own ADHD at this point in life. I run both our internal neurodiversity programming, which has included a supported internship and some other supports, and running our ERG, and a couple of small neurodiversity pilot programs with some different federal agencies, helping them learn how to be more neuroinclusive.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, we have a lot to discuss today, and we want to ensure that we have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So any questions that you have for our panelists today, go ahead and send them in the chat. We'll store them until the end of our discussion. But before we start, we did feel that it was really important to make sure that we give a brief definition of the term neurodiversity. Now, I know you've heard that a lot already, but we understand that there might be some folks that are tuning in that aren't as familiar with the term. Neurodiversity is a term used to represent the natural variations in all of the ways that our diverse brains process and interpret information. This term is sometimes used to reference neurodivergence, which is an umbrella term that refers to distinct developmental differences such as ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and others. These variations in brain function can lead to unique strengths and drive innovation and productivity in the workplace. So at the end of the day, neurodiversity really highlights the importance of understanding that all people are different and that there are things that we can do to support the differences through neuro-inclusive efforts, which is the topic of our conversation today. So with that, let's get started with our questions. Now that we've established some definitions, let's explore a little bit more about neuro-inclusivity. So Patrick, can you please expand on the business case for neuro-inclusion and how it benefits everyone in the workplace?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And I think this is my whole career has been dedicated to this. We've set up a we've set up a business on this business case, and we've been successful because of, not in spite of, our neuro-inclusivity efforts. More broadly speaking, when you think about the business case, of course you're going to look at a company, and hopefully there's employers listening today that are already neuro-inclusive, in all likelihood you are, or are considering broadening their talent scope. And so what I would say to you is, talent is one of the #1 things that people are struggling with. I mean, we're not that far away from the Great Resignation, where 40 million people left their jobs. Yet we still are, I believe, underrepresenting neuro-inclusivity in the workforce, and there's a number of reasons for that. But it starts obviously with employers, and so the benefits, talent pool expansion. I mentioned innovation, problem solving. We're talking about all kinds of minds. I believe the world needs all kinds of minds to solve its biggest problems, and you see that, and in a microcosm at a business like Spectrum Designs, where we see problem solving because we're a production facility every single day, and we're looking at efficiency. So that's a big part of it. The other thing I would mention is another big one is retention. We're seeing, I mean, there's more and more data coming out now that retention rates for those with disabilities, when you have a neuro-inclusive employee, tends to be upwards of 90%. And that, by the way, doesn't just affect the individual that's working there, but the company as a whole. It's more expensive, obviously, to hire and rehire than it is to retain talent. Talked a little bit about productivity. That's really important. We see that more and more. I know at Spectrum Designs, and again, we're making generalizations here, but I see people who come to work and want to work, who are dedicated, who care about what we're doing, and also quite enjoy the structure and the routine of a work day. And so, things like lunch breaks and things are just not abused. So that's a really big business case. And then taking one more step outwards, think about the company's image as a brand, as the way it's presenting itself to the world. If you're not being truly inclusive at this point in 2024, I think that there's going to be a problem there, right? More and more companies are being assessed by not just their share price and how much money they can make for their shareholders, but also what are they doing in the world? How are they making a positive difference? What are their DEIA efforts? What do they look like? How are they impacting the environment? And positive brand image, disability, neuro-inclusion is a big part of that. And so, there are many more I could talk about, but for me, those are some of the biggest ones from, like I said, from employee retention, productivity to company brand image and general kind of culture as we move into 2025.
I love that. I love how you hit on really all of the key things, right? HRA. I think like those elements of recruiting, hiring, retention, and advancement for organizations is always a struggle. And it always kind of has been. And the benefits to neuro-inclusivity in the workplace were just highlighted so beautifully in that. Absolutely. So Teresa, what recommendations, now that we've discussed, he's laid out such a beautiful runway for us. What recommendations do you have to help organizations or HR teams begin assessing their company's current level of neuro-inclusion?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. And we gotta jump out the gate with saying you have a neurodiverse staff, right? If they're saying 1 in 36 kids, and that's got to be skewed, we know that's skewed for lots of different reasons, is being diagnosed on the spectrum. If you've got more than 36 people in your workplace, you have folks there that need you to be paying attention to neuroinclusion. So just start with that, with laying the groundwork. They're there. Also, I want to go back a little bit and just foot stomp the whole quality thing and say all this stuff you see behind me that has MITRE written all over it, it's totally from Patrick and his crew. And that my favorite thing to hold while I'm fidgeting in meetings is this one, by the way. I think you don't carry that anymore though, so I just want to bring that to your attention. This is the new one, also phenomenal. These are quiet ways to fidget while you're presenting in a panel. May or may not be happening. So,
Teresa.
Love that. We'll add
fly both our colors here.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so I think a great way is to start looking around and paying attention. That's really where it is. The key to this all is paying attention. And you go and see, do you have an ERG that focuses on neurodiversity? Does your accessibility ERG, do you have ERGs at all? If you're smaller, start asking people what work is like for them, and if there's anything that could be, you don't have to ask, do you have a diagnosis? Just ask what kinds of things people struggle with at work and what might be a barrier. We found when we were first looking to start a program, hoping to start an ERG, and I wanted to start an autism-focused ERG, and I am not on the autism spectrum. I have no business starting that. I just was begging people, and they have real work to do, so it wasn't happening. And it was recommended that I bring in speakers who are on the spectrum, speakers who focus on neurodiversity, speakers who have some expertise and experience to get that conversation started, to express our desire as an organization to really take folks seriously and to create a safe space, but then also just to get that conversation going, give people some of the words they would need to use. And it worked. It worked. At the Q&A sessions after those, people would say, hey, well, I'm on the spectrum and this is what happens at MITRE for me, and this is what works and what doesn't work. And that was a really, really great way to jump in. Another good thing to do is compare yourself to others, which I know they tell us not to do, but it's great. What are other organizations doing? What is out there? What is the art of the possible? If it's not in one of the lists that got sent out, I highly recommend that you Google Neurodiversity at Work Playbook. It's a free download. If you Google Neurodiversity at Work Playbook Federal Edition, that's what I helped co-write. You can look for the, what are we called, Patrick? The Neurodiversity at Work Employers Roundtable. Google that one too. You'll see a lot of the companies that are being really, really intentional, and you can go look up what they're doing. Look in your region for a neurodiversity hub. We call them hubs. It's just a networking group that meets kind of regularly and shares information, and you can see what's going on. You can learn what kinds of things are best practices and take a look at what you're doing. There are also some official ways you can do that. There are Neuroinclusive workplace certifications. Again, you can just Google that. You'll find all kinds of stuff that's available out there as a way to start. And none of these are an end. It never is an end, but they're a great way to just look and assess where you are and maybe find a jumping off point that would work for you and your org.
That was a really important point that you made. This is not an end, right? Like neuro-inclusion is a journey. And one of the ways and one of the best places to start when looking at neuro-inclusive efforts is recruitment. Joy, what are some key neuro-inclusive strategies that you've seen work for teams involved in a company's recruitment or even their interview process?
Great question, and thank you for that, Chelsea. I want to go back to Patrick for just a minute and just affirm this issue of commitment and retention, or what a professional said to me is sustained engagement. When we're going to talk about the recruiting process, we're going to discuss some changes. And so why would you do that? And so again, Patrick, just to affirm, my experience has shown that those individuals that do commit to your organizations are very loyal and very committed. And then Teresa, to follow up and just, again, share this journey, these ERGs create community and a sense of belonging. And we all want to be a part of something, and that being alone is really scary. And so just having that, and then to your point, working smarter, not harder. There's an incredible global society out there that's been attacking this issue for a number of years. We're making progress, not quickly, but again, to learn from one another as an educator, that's something that I think has great value. So I'm going to share with you several points in the recruitment and interview process. I'm going to tell you the what's, not the whys. Now, as an educator, the why is important to me, but if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to discuss that piece with you, because all of these items are probably going to be different than what you're currently doing. But you might want to know, why am I making this change? That's an important one. And because of time, we don't have that today, but I want to provide that if you're interested. So the first step to me begins with the job posting. It's critical that you look at that, that you eliminate some of the language that we commonly use, like excellent communicator, excellent communication skills, or superior organization skills, or team players. Those are items that often will cause an individual to self-select out and never apply for your post because they don't feel they meet that criteria. Accessible language, readable fonts, Arial, Verdana, size 12 and 14, all of those things, you want to start out well to get this out to as many people as can accept it. Dyslexia and autism are not uncommon combinations, and so being able for that to be a readable post is important. State the nature of the role. What will I be doing? Tell me the do part of it. And if you ask for a cover letter or a CV, ask and give specific information. How long do you want it to be? What's the minimum word count? Don't make the candidate guess what is socially appropriate, because most likely they will guess incorrectly. If you only want 2 pages, tell them that straight up. And finally, in your job description, make sure that it's clear, concise, and specific. What is the activity and the product that will be happening for this individual? For your interview process, be very specific. If you're going to do it via Zoom, if it's going to be in person, get detailed. Again, things that we take for granted, like, well, everybody knows where the Coca-Cola building is located. Give a specific address, tell how, which door to enter, which floor, what elevator button to push, give specifics. And the thing about all this is not just for neurodivergent individuals. This is universal design. This is great for everybody, reduces anxiety. Offer interview adjustments. A lot of organizations don't start with that opportunity to make adjustments or accommodations in the interview. If an individual needs that support, allow them that opportunity to say, yes, I'd like that. EY and other organizations have fully redesigned the interview process for a number of positions, and they do work simulations. It's a 3 to 4 day interview process with groups of individuals. So instead of hiring a candidate based upon their ability to think fast and answer a question, or to be smooth with the interviewer and they're just a great conversationalist, the interview process ends in a work product. It shows you what this individual's capable of. Instead of asking the question, what are your strengths? Give them an activity to actually demonstrate the strengths, and give them choice. Maybe they're going to do a whiteboard demonstration. Maybe they're going to do a problem and give you the product typed in a graph, but let them leverage that item, that area of expertise that they're going to bring to your company. Couple more, in an effort to help the applicant be their very best self, and this is an awkward one, and I've seen this be so successful, but some companies are actually giving the questions for the interview ahead of time. to, again, everybody, not just the person that identifies as autistic. So if you're going to ask 10 questions, put those 10 questions out. Didn't you have that teacher in school that actually told you what was going to be on the test so you could prepare the very best response? An individual might go on and ask Siri or, Chat GPT what the answer is. It's irrelevant. The questions you're going to ask, if they're well worded, are really what that individual is bringing to the table. And finally, one of the best ways to improve the interview process and to be fully neuro-inclusive is to ask those people who you've recently hired what worked and what didn't work. Get that internal input from your organization and let them help you.
Love all of that. Thank you so much. Very clear details there. As a reminder, if you want to know the why, reach out to Joy on LinkedIn. She'll give you the whys. Don't forget if you want to know more. I know time is limited. We'd love to dive into more whys. While discussing recruitment, it's essential to also be talking about internal processes. I've always said it's not enough to recruit top talent. We have to retain top talent too, right? So Teresa, can you share some effective practices that you've seen in organizations for supporting autistic and other neurodivergent employees during the onboarding process?
Yeah, and it is just sort of a step right in from the interview process, right, Joy? So a lot of what you said applies here too. And I want to just point out that a lot of the early programming focused on hiring and onboarding, and then you just sort of throw them over the fence. We've got them here, yay! And that is all just really worthless if there's no ongoing support, if there's no ongoing, that paying attention piece that comes after that. So I'll talk a little bit about how you can weave this stuff in later, but just to Joy's point, and Chelsea, we can get them in the door. You really doesn't do you any good unless you keep them. So keep that in mind as you go in. And I do want to I heard you say, Joy, everybody knows. If you ever, I teach that as a flag. If you ever hear yourself thinking everybody knows, or that's common sense, just stop.
Yes.
Why would everybody know that? This is the hard part. What is it that everybody knows? Because we just know, but we couldn't put it in a sentence if our life depended on it as a neurotypical. I say we. But keep that as a flag in your mind. Everybody knows, or that's common sense. Just think that through a little bit. I'm training myself on that. So onboarding. This is something we're learning a lot in our pilots with the federal government, because as you can imagine, not only is the process to get in crazy, onboarding is insane. And the things that go on in that, we're learning a lot on these, God bless these interns. Part of what we do is make part of the onboarding training for the team, for the managers, for the people these folks are going to be working with. When we do it with our interns, I separate those so that I'm not saying, this is all about autism. Oh, look, here's a random new person who I can't tell you their diagnosis, but wink, wink. Not cool. And also people just need to know these things anyway. So we sort of, do that several weeks or a month ahead of time, just to make sure people have that. They have those flags and they know the basic understanding what they're looking at. So make part of onboarding training for the team, for the department, for the division, for as many folks as you can get, so that the groundwork is laid. The rest of this that I'm going to talk about is, to Joy's point, is just good practice. This will make everybody happy. Some of your folks will survive. All of your folks will be happy, right? So super clear instructions, like Joy said. Where are they going for onboarding, for orientation, for the first day? Where do you park? Which door do you come in? What desk do you go to? What's going to happen when you tell them you're here? Where are they going to point you to? Where are you going to go? What's going to happen that whole first day? What's that going to look like? Everybody should know that, because that'll ratchet down the anxiety. I'll be able to throw out a number here. I'm going to say that ratchets down the anxiety for me by like 30%. If I know, because you told me what color the carpet's going to be, I know exactly where I am. I'm in the right place. That part I got. Break the schedule down into manageable chunks. So I know that in, for instance, DHS, your first week is doing back-to-back online trainings. And it's all the things they have to train you: how to do your paperwork, how to do what security, all those things. It's really critical stuff. But not only is it really uncomfortable for folks who are ADHD and folks who have trouble with sustained focus, but also it is ineffective because it all starts just to become noise and come in and go out. So some of our folks had to get a special accommodation to be able to take it in chunks for it to make sense. I think that should be something that everybody gets to do. If you are data dump in small bits. Paperwork, please make sure your forms make sense. We tend to use the same forms for years, and we just photocopy the photocopies or send them to that link, and we don't ever look at them again. If they don't make sense, your neurotypical is going to be frustrated. Someone on the spectrum is going to shut down. I'm somewhere in the middle. I have to go write down somewhere why this doesn't make sense, and then I can get back to it. Make sure they're accessible. I know that's sort of the law, but some people, again, we're reusing stuff again. So make sure they're readable, make sure they make sense, make sure you can get to them. And then don't let that be the end of thinking through the things that make sense for your team as they carry on through the rest of their career. And Joy, anything you want to add to that?
You're on mute, Joy.
Thank you. A couple of things. Onboarding can be overwhelming, and Teresa, you've already identified that. It can go on for days, literally. And having come out of an education world and walked into a business world as a neurotypical, it just about took me out. But one of the pieces that was helpful for, again, not just some individuals, neurodistinct individuals, but all of us, was we had access to recorded trainings. So if we needed to go back and there was something that we missed, that we could go back and grab that. The other piece, which was a good learning piece for me, I also had someone that was doing some of the trainings and say, I'm here for you. This is my job, learning and development. I just, anything you need, anytime you need something, you just reach out to me. And so they gave us their email and they gave us their phone number, and I knew what to do with that information, all right? However, one of the individuals I was training with, a very literal thinker, took that statement literally. I'm here for you anytime, reach out to me. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, when this individual had a question about the training, they called the trainer on their cell phone to ask the individual. And the trainer was caught off guard, but very lovely, and came back and said, I was very literal. I did say that exactly. So be aware that having that information is important. But again, to your point, Teresa, add the layer of, please call me between this hour and this hour, or email me 24/7, but I don't check my email when I'm sleeping. Again, those additional details, if we say it, we need to mean what they say, and learning to begin to have that mindset and not assume that everybody thinks about it the way we do.
Great example. Thank you for sharing that. Now, as we're on the topic of training, let's kind of shift to training more other staff and leadership. Patrick, can you give some examples about how training can be introduced to impact these other teams and leaders most effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've got a kind of funny example about how just kind of getting people, like you said, more broadly on board with a neuro-inclusive initiative. I mean, we're like founded on that, right? So all of our staff and everything, you wouldn't work here if you weren't like on board with that. But recently, in the last 6 months, we were like, we want to get this sustainability certification that was a green printing certification for the print industry, nothing to do with neuro-inclusion. It was about sustainability. And I was scratching my head being like, why can't I get people on board with this? Why are people like, no one cares about turning that light off when they leave the room. No one's like, what is it? Why am I? And so I had to kind of dive in a bit more and be like, oh, they're worried about how it's going to affect their day-to-day, and this is going to make their lives more difficult, and what's in it, and with them, what's in it for me, right? And I was like, I never thought about that with neuro-inclusion because everyone here is on board with it. But actually, sustainability, people aren't really, so what do we have to do? And so I sat down and took it from that approach and kind of relearned what we'd already learned 10, 15 years ago about how to onboard, hire, recruit people with the core value of neuro-inclusion, or in this case, sustainability, as part of that, right? So it's baked into your interview questions, it's baked into your onboarding, it's baked into your trainings, that like this is part of who we are. It's not just something that an executive team member said we should do and then kind of stopped thinking about and went on to the next thing. And that's what I started off wrong by doing with the sustainability. I was like, we're going to do this, and then went away and did something else, and everyone was like, we're not into it. And so I think in terms of that training, yeah, there's being more specific with that. There's of course a ton of, thanks to Teresa and all this growing body of research and you know, around and great information around neuroinclusion and the best practices for employment and hiring and retention that you can use. You don't have to reinvent the wheel if you're an employer, is what I'm saying now. There's so much great stuff out there over the last decade. And Joy, I know you can contribute as well, and obviously OAR has. And so I think starting there, but also, like I said, it's not just about sitting people down and being like, all right, we've got another training, you need to sit through, it's half an hour, then you go to lunch. It's really about sitting and understanding what parts of your business, the key people in those roles, if it's human resources, if it's operations, if it's management, if it's supervisors, that they're on board and trained with what's required and how differently they need to perform their roles, with the ultimate truth that we know, and Teresa and Joy both mentioned it, that this will actually make their lives better, right? Universal design. We're going to make changes to the way we operate, the way we communicate. We're not just going to use email. We're going to change it up. We're going to have verbal. We're going to have videos. We're going to use QR codes that link to videos for training, all those kinds of things that actually are going to make this place a better place to be for everyone. And it has to come back to that, what's in it for me. Ultimately, everyone who's working is working. They want their job to go smoothly. They don't wake up in the morning wanting to be frustrated or angry at someone. I truly believe people don't want that. But that can happen if they're not trained properly in the right ways to communicate, the right ways to supervise, the right ways to manage. And that has to come not just from the top, but it needs to kind of be permeated across. And it needs to be consistent. It can't just be all right, we're going to do this thing because it's April or it's October, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. Like, it has to be there forever for it to be successful. And as said, that universal design principle means that actually, yes, in the beginning it's a change, but ultimately it benefits everyone.
Love that. I love the point about the WIFM. I love a good WIFM. What's in it for me? I think it's just such a key part of helping people to see themselves in it, to do the change, to be a part of the change and a part of the greater mission.
Yeah.
Joy, through your educator lens, right? Like, what are some other trainings that you've seen to be effective in fostering your own inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah. Patrick, I think, you know, your point's very well taken, and this, nobody wants another lecture. You know, those of us who went through school, it's like, you know, enough of the lectures. And so I think part of it to me, and having been privileged to support leaders and managers, their plates are full. They have a whole lot going on. So as an educator, I live my life reading and voracious, but that's my primary job. This education piece, and you know, why would I take the time to do this? And the why, we're back to the why, what's in it for me, is just a critical piece. Honest, truly, good pedagogy is good pedagogy, but what I have seen be most effective in the workplace is the aspect of story. And the statement amongst many in the neurodiversity space is nothing about us without us. We know that at least 20% of the people with, you know, in most general organizations, not necessarily a specific organization, but at least 20% of us are going to identify as neurodivergent or neurodistinct. So the stories are there in your organization. If you have a leader that will step up, a manager, or just a team member that will share a bit of their story, that will resonate far more effective than a canned program, a textbook, listen to the lecture and answer 4 questions at the end. But that relational, personal story to me is what I have seen to be the most effective.
And that sneaks back into what I was saying earlier. If nobody wants to just step up and expose themselves like that, if you bring somebody in from the outside, then you can get the yeah and me too's. And then that brings in the stories of people they actually know. And I want to carry on from what I said earlier, that dropping a training on managers and walking away helps, but in the long term is not going to help them through the, oh my God, this just happened, now what do I do? So trying to make sure there's somebody there for those moments. What do I tell this other person who just asked me about that person, and then what are they doing? And they need some navigation. So that, again, continuing it through, if at all possible, at least knowing where to point them to.
And Teresa, I'm going to just tag on, and again, my business experience, I coach a lot of individuals outside of an organization, but Ernst & Young is the only organization I've been inside of, and one of the greatest respects that I have for them is the fact that they put monies towards hiring internal coaches to support the team members. Was kind of how it got started, but more than half my day was spent supporting managers and leaders. And I think that ongoing availability, and nobody was required to do anything, we were simply accessible. But what started as accessible for a small portion of the organization became accessible to anybody that needed to have that conversation or understand that. And I love that commitment to ongoing availability for support. It is a very complicated space, neurodiversity. And to your point, Teresa, we need, if this is truly a neuro-inclusion initiative, if this is something that we're going to morph into and become as a neuro-inclusive society, we're in it for the long run.
Yeah, I'm going to take it a little bit. Sorry, Chelsea, I'm running away with the topic here. Yeah, but if you're not Ernst & Young, which a lot of us aren't, right. There are some other options for you. So there are some organizations that do that as a service, where you can, call up and get support. And I'm not going to throw names out because I'm legally not allowed to do that. But they're out there. And then also, like for us, when we brought in interns, there's schools. I recruited from schools that I knew had strong autism support programs. And you can go to the College Autism Network website and find a list of those schools. And then they have built-in social workers and built-in counselors and people who really want their students to succeed. And so not only can the students call them for help, I can call them up and say, we're having a real problem with tardiness. What do we do? And they would just walk us and sit down with the student and the manager and walk them through everything. So, and that, didn't cost us a dime. It was super, super helpful.
I love that this conversation evolved to really mention the importance of every connectivity, all of the connectivity within the organization being on board, everybody having a part to play in this. And with that being said, making sure that they have the understanding of why it's important for them, how it's going to also help them and their people. So as we're kind of threading through the organization, let's move now into leadership. Patrick, can you discuss examples or ways that executive leaders can take more of a top-down approach to supporting neuro-inclusive efforts at work?
Yeah, and I think I kind of touched on that in the prior question a little bit with the example of sustainability and realizing that you can't just have you can't just set something expected to happen. So I think executive leadership, and as Joy rightly said, like people have full plates, and so the big thing for me that executive leaders can do is really stay true to it, right? Have someone who they know that they're going to be in charge of this and check in with it, follow it, lead by example, do the research, read, learn that this isn't just a nice thing to do. And the first question you asked me, Chelsea, was about the business case. And I think executive leaders, they're kind of always having to make the business case, right? Like that's their responsibility. And so understanding that this isn't just something that's, as I said, they're nice thing to do, but actually there are really strong, well-researched by companies like Deloitte, business reasons for doing this. You'll convince people in that way, in a way that you might not if you just try to appeal to their kind of inner greater sense of good, right? Because ultimately everyone has to do what they have to do and they have full plates. And so I think executive leaders have that responsibility to have an understanding, to understand the business case, to be consistent in what they're doing, but also to live and breathe it, right? we've challenged ourselves recently as an organization. For the first 10 years of Spectrum Design's existence, we patted ourselves on the back for having people you know, who are neurodistinct making things in our company, right? We're a production facility, so we had lots of people working in warehouses and operating on machines a little bit and working on the floor. And I was like, that's not enough. We have to be a company made up of people who are neurodistinct, not just making. And so we started looking at management roles and other parts of the company like administration and marketing, where we didn't have much representation, and shame on us, right? But that's kind of the point, is you're never really finished with this if you're going to be true to what you're doing. And by the way, we made the changes about 18 months ago. Our marketing team is now fully neurodistinct, including Kelly, who's our head of social media, who's autistic, and who made a video that went viral 4 weeks ago, got 20 million views, took us from 6,000 to 100,000 followers. That's not happened in 15 years of us being in existence. And it took us going, where could we be doing better to make that change? And business case, once again, it wasn't like, look at me, I'm hiring someone it was like, hang on a minute, that's the best marketing team we've ever had. Like, and we need to, and so it's not just oh, isn't that a nice thing and I get to tell people about it? But no, actually, the results spoke for themselves, and we got, I think, a 400% increase in quote requests through our website. So there was an ROI attached to the social media reaction. So my point is that, kind of long-winded point, is that like there are so many ways that executives can affect these things from leadership, and you're kind of never done, which is a good thing, right? You want to keep evolving and learning in any area of what you're doing, but particularly in this field because it is relatively new. I mean, the term neurodiversity when we first started wasn't in the common vernacular. Great, I'm very happy that it is, and that just shows that that we must always keep learning and wanting to improve ourselves, and any good executive team will want to do that too.
What a great example of one of the business cases that you mentioned, which was innovation. Like, that's such a beautiful, perfect example of how neurodiverse minds can help organizations think outside of the box and do something a little different. And things are changing so quickly, right? Like, we have to constantly be evolving, as you've mentioned, as organizations. Teresa, what are some common challenges or barriers that you've identified among companies implementing neuro-inclusive practices? I know we've already kind of touched on one, which is that leaders have full plates. What are some other ones that you've seen?
A huge one. And I love that question comes now because it feeds into what Patrick was just saying. So the number one barrier to any kind of effort is fear, and fear mostly of doing it wrong. And the fear that they're going to try and it's going to be the wrong way and they're going to use the wrong language and somebody's going to be unhappy and something's going to go wrong and somebody's going to have too much on their plate, and just real fear. And, you know, part of the way around that is, to Patrick's point, is knowing why it's worth taking that risk. So knowing, and you know, when you go to your executive leadership team or your board or whoever you're taking this to, if it's more than two people, it's going to be more than one type of person. So you're going to have to hit that heart story, and it's a good and the feel good and the reasons this is good, and then you've got to hit the numbers. This is great for ROI. This is not going to cost that much, and it's going to be, you know, chances are it's going to give us a lot more engagement, and you know, you have to hit all of that because you've got all neurotypes to help assuage those fears, which is also where that education and training that Patrick was talking about really comes in. You don't have to figure this out. It's as much as it can be to this point been figured out. There are playbooks. There are organizations that will help you. We hired an org to come in and help us when we first got started, and then we learned, you know, what we didn't know, and then started learning a bunch more. And so, fear that you're going to do it wrong, fear that it's going to be too difficult or take too much time or not be worth it. And again, that's where some of that training, fear from the legal team, which is the ultimate fear of getting it wrong. But training everybody up on how you mitigate those things and why it's worth it. After that, the challenges we face are when things need to change. So if there's a new manager, new program leadership, the champion leaves, it goes to another company or is let go, heaven forbid, or some new CEO comes in and decides this isn't, worth that person that they were paying to really focus on that. And so I think that's why we really work on, and I have had the extreme privilege of following behind the EYs and the SAPs and the Microsofts to see some of the stuff they've had to face. And so I think we're all learning as a community that you have to make your changes systemic. It can't be based on the fact that your CEO has a son on the spectrum, because that guy's not always going to be there. And you have to just, those interview practices that Joy was talking about, those are changed now. It doesn't matter who's in charge of EY, it's there. And those, the onboarding practices are, once you change them, they're changed. That the template that we use for evaluating people's performance, once you've taken out, is a great communicator and put that into something that makes more sense and is a little less fudgeable by people with biases, right? Then it's fixed. I mean, it'll still need tweaking, but you really have to make those changes systemic. But to get a program in the first place, you really have to help people get over their fears. And we do that a lot by saying, here's the box. And, you never stay within that box, but you don't have to make this up. It's the best way to overcome those. So those are the two biggies: fear and change.
Thank you. Joy, is there anything else that you want to add to this?
I'm just going to echo what Teresa said, fear and change. In 2023, the Institute of Leadership and Management released a survey, and I want to quote this, I want to read this. It says that half of all leaders and managers would not employ a neurodivergent person. And the report noted that there was a gulf between the lived experience of neurodivergence and the perception of those experiences held by neurotypical people. But again, to her point, the fear was the basis for not hiring, as we don't know exactly what we're doing, and we might not. And so, hats off to Microsoft, SAP, JP Morgan Chase, and EY, who stepped out. They wrote that Autism at Work playbook, which was originally published in 2019. I encourage you to go and look at it, because they stepped out and they went past that fear with logic. I'm all about logic, and with heart, and they tried something. Now, a lot of it didn't work, but guess what? That's the growth mindset. That's the educator in me that says, okay, I know how not to do that now, but here are all the things that did work, and we springboard. And if you go into any of those large organizations, to your point, Teresa, they don't look like they did in 2019, but all along the way, they got input, they got support, and they're continuing to grow, and we move towards neuroinclusion, which is what this is all about. It's good for all of us.
Thank you so much. Now, before we wrap up, I do have a final question for our panelists, and this one is really for the job seekers that are attending today's conversation. So panelists, how would you each coach or advise employees when asking for accommodations at work? And anybody can jump in to answer that.
I always coach people, you don't have to disclose a diagnosis to ask for something that will help you succeed at work. And if you need a way to word that, then I always say you go in with the phrase, I am at my best when, or you will get the most out of me if, or I can really get much more done if. And you don't have to disclose a diagnosis to your boss. HR might require it, they shouldn't, some do. But it's really, really about, you need to know how to articulate your strengths, first of all. And there are tools you can use to find those if you don't know them. I was in my early 40s before I really had a way to articulate things I was good at. So I highly recommend you do that sooner than in your 40s if you're in your career. And then know how to articulate what you need, which sometimes, like as somebody with ADHD, I just feel like I should be able to do these things. Like that's where I end, instead of, I really need some help with executive functioning. And so I've learned just by going to lots of conferences, watching lots of YouTube videos, but also you can go to askjan.org. The Job Accommodation Network is a gold mine. Not only is it something accessible online, but also you can call them. It's totally free if you don't count your taxes, which is what pays for it. And you can be totally anonymous if you want to. You can just talk through anything you need help with, or you can go in and type in. You don't have to know the words like executive functioning either. You can say like time management or meeting deadlines, and it'll help you by listing types of accommodations you can ask for that might be helpful for that. And we'll give you some of the language around it if you need to communicate those things. So there's lots of free stuff out there. I highly recommend askjan.org. They've got a couple of new tools in there just launched this month that are really cool as well. So explore that. It's a good one.
I agree with all of those.
Go ahead, Joy.
I agree with all of those. And I would simply say, it's so important to not go this alone. So often we feel like it's our responsibility. So quick thing at the beginning of the call, they were going all over the technical parts of this webinar and how to use them. And I was scared about something that was like, oh, do I ask? And I did. And everybody was very gracious. And so I want those that are needing to ask, to Teresa's point, know where your struggles are. Know yourself best. If you keep missing 8 o'clock meetings, know that you're not an early morning person, and then talk with, maybe it's your best friend at home, maybe it's your parent, maybe it's an advisor in the company, but talk to somebody about what the issue is, because they're going to help you come up with some options that you didn't know. The coaches that I have, one of the biggest statements I get is, but Joy, what are my choices? And so to go to Ask Jan, it's a great source, but find out where your barriers are and then find out who can help you. And 90% of the time, honest, truly, I have heard yes when adjustments or accommodations are requested. And if the answer is no, what I have heard from organizations is, we can't do that, but we might be able to do this. And so you problem solve together, but don't go it alone.
Yeah, well said, both. And I think, you know, being a non-New York native, one of the things I learned when I moved here straight away was, if you don't ask, the answer is always no, to Joy's point. And so asking is so important. Otherwise, people often just don't know, or they can't answer it. For the job seeker in particular, one of the things, you know, I think is always a great sign of a company is if part of the process in terms of setting up an interview, they ask you what accommodations you might need. That is like, to me, every company should be doing that. They should have just literally a sentence in their application process to every candidate. Let us know what accommodations you need. So if you see that, that's a great entry point. But also, you know, the interview process in general is not super, to me, it's antiquated, the traditional interview process. So wherever possible for a job seeker, you know, this isn't really about accommodations, but it's like, demonstrate your skills, right? So if you're a designer, bring your portfolio. If you're a creative, show where you're creative. Ask and inquire about practical assessments of skills that allow you to show how you thrive versus an environment that's kind of across the table that might not be, to your point. And then finally, you know, I love Dave Thompson in our community talks about the rainforest and how, you know, there's a reason it's the most luscious and fruitful environment for things to grow on the planet, and it's because it has all the ingredients, including biodiversity, to have organisms thrive. And that's, to Teresa's point, that's what you need to present to your employer. I'm at my best when I thrive, when I can give you and be the best contributor to this organization when, and the rainforest should be where everyone wants to be in terms of growth and metaphorically, of course.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I see that we have about 4 minutes till the end of our panel today. I want to see if maybe there's a question or two that the team has pulled through that might be good for our panelists to answer.
Yes, thank you, Chelsea, and thanks to also our panel. So just as a reminder, you've got the questions box in the control panel, so pop those questions in there, but we do have a couple here. The first one is, what strategies can organizations implement to prevent burnout among neurodivergent employees?
Anybody can jump in to take that.
Boundaries, you know, the clear directions, clear boundaries, clear, you know what, I need this. next Tuesday by 3 o'clock. And really, it's more important to me that I just get a sketch. It doesn't have to be perfect, because people will work themselves. They will not eat, sleep, drink, go to the bathroom to make it absolutely perfect if you haven't given boundaries. And they will say yes to everything if you don't help them set boundaries. Without those super clear boundaries, your ADHDers are never going to start, and your autistic folks are never going to stop. And so that, I think, is one. Allowing psychological safety is another one. Joy, Patrick? Great question.
Clarity and communication, to your point, Teresa. I was working with an individual the other day, and they were under the impression that the project was supposed to be finished by a certain time. All the manager wanted was a report as to where the project was. And so again, the clarity in that, by Tuesday at noon, I need to hear where you are or whatever. That's back to communication, which don't we all challenge with that communication, but the detail in the communication can help with the burnout. The other issue is the issue of masking. It's exhausting. Again, I don't deal with it personally, but I deal with individuals that do. And so being sensitive, if somebody says I need time off or I need to step away, to believe them that they definitely need to do that.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think that those are the keys. And then besides, any other good company that encourages people to take their lunch breaks and use their time off before they're exhausted and burnt out, take it off proactively. There's no shame in taking time off to recharge. Do it before you need it, I would say.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm just keeping track of time here for us. We have 1 minute left. OAR or Karina, do you feel like that's enough time for another question, or should we go ahead and wrap up?
There is, I think, a really good question that came in from Stella, and so I'll just go ahead and read it. She said, I consistently have the highest numbers in my position and am my department's most productive employee, but my social difficulties are holding me back from being taken seriously as an employee. How can I better advocate for myself as a neurodivergent woman in the workforce for both myself and my ND colleagues?
These are hard questions, y'all.
Yeah,
I mean, deep, important, and at the heart of a lot of what folks really need once they get into the job. And I think, again, learning how to articulate your strengths, helping maybe revamp, I don't know, some of that's at the core of the org, right? Helping to revamp how you're evaluated, asking for some quantitative ways to evaluate that that lead to a promotion, instead of relying on the qualitative things that can get so fudgy with people. That's a huge one. I think that's a whole other webinar we could, or a working group.
I would like to plug in, I'm sorry, I just want to share that. I would like to plug in, work with your HR teams on that as well, because, and your employee resource teams, or excuse me, HR. I'm just gonna say HR because words are really hard right now. For some reason, it's lunchtime here in the East Coast, so that's probably what's happening to me. The thing that I would encourage is really partner with the HR teams on that, because it's their responsibility to really help ensure that you're not being overlooked for those types of reasons. If you're meeting the main skills of the position, and then that's really what matters most. I think what I do find a lot is that sometimes leadership roles, you know, you mentioned maybe missing out on advancement opportunities. So sometimes leadership roles do have some of those more vague, communicates well kind of descriptors as well. And that's something to bring to the attention, because everybody communicates differently, and everybody leads differently, and everybody relates to others differently. And oftentimes what I've seen is that in the positions for advancement, neurodiverse folks will get filtered out, because what's happening is they're not, the interviewers or the people in charge of promotions are comparing versus seeing the strengths of that individual for promotion. So when you bring those things to attention to the HR teams, they're able to reevaluate their processes, but they're really in those positions to really help you with that. Joy, were you going to say anything additional? Do you
Number
want
one,
to add?
Stella, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have this conversation with you. And number two, Chelsea, this really is a conversation for another webinar because it's a critical piece as we've hired so many individuals in that are neurodivergent or neurodistinct into the business world. What next? I think that'd be a great continuation.
Wonderful, everyone. So I think we're going to go ahead and close out. So I'd like to thank our moderator and our panelists, Chelsea, Patrick, Teresa, and Joy. And thanks everyone in our audience for joining us today. If you found today's event helpful, we encourage you to register for OAR's next webinar event, recognizing and supporting mental health needs among autistic people in employment. And that's on October 24th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And once you close out today's event, you will receive an exit survey, and we would love it if you could complete that and provide your feedback. Everyone will receive a follow-up email today with their certificate of attendance. And on behalf of the Organization for Autism Research, thank you again for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of your day.